Good morning. Welcome to the Growth and Regeneration Scrutiny panel. Can I remind attendees that this meeting is being live webcast and ask that mobile phones be please put on silent. Before we move to the formal agenda, I would like to do a round of introductions. So I am Councillor Zarina Amin.
Chris Frank, Co-op
Councillor Bill Armour, Kirkburton Ward.
Councillor Alison Munro, Almonbury Ward.
Excuse me, Councillor Graham Turner, Cabinet Member for Growth and Region and Economic Growth.
Councillor Moses Crook, Cabinet Member for Transport.
Thank you, officers.
Morning, I'm Edward Highfield, Service Director for Skills and Regeneration.
I'm Lucy Wade, I'm with the Transport Strategy and Policy team.
I'm Rashid Mahmood, Head of Major Projects, Kirklees Council. Thank you.
Councillor Harry McCarthy from Colne Valley Ward.
Good morning, Alistair Kimpton, Acting Manager for the Asset Strategy team.
Good morning, Mark Varley, Asset Strategy Officer in the Asset Strategy team.
And I believe we've members of the public here as well.
Oh, that one. Thank you very much. I'm Andrew Wilson. I'm here to ask some public questions.
Councillor Lee Richards here as part of the Active Travel Partnership to ask a couple of questions on the transport strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the Governance Officer if there have been any apologies for the meeting?
We've received apologies from Councillor Dargy and Jonathan Milner.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, are we okay to approve these?
Do you want to propose it? Yes. Okay, I'll propose the minutes.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do we have any interest to declare? Any members who have any interest to declare, can you please complete the attached form and submit to Jenny at the end of the meeting?
I'd like to declare I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in agenda item 7 and I'm going to leave the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Admission of the public. There are no exclusions of the public items and all agenda items will be considered in public session. Deputations and petitions. Jenny, have we received any deputations and petitions?
None received, Chair.
Agenda item 6, public question time. Jenny, have we received any questions from members of the public?
Yes, we've received public questions from Mr. Andrew Wilson, who's in attendance today.
Mr. Wilson, would you like to present your questions?
Yeah, thank you for your time, everyone. Morning. First question. It would be good to know over a period of time whether the food hall opening in Queensgate Market Hall is a success or not. One measure would be the number of food and drink businesses in Huddersfield Town Centre, the variety and the ownership before and after the food hall opens. In order to establish a trend for each year since 2018, please could you tell me how many food and drink businesses there were in Huddersfield Town Centre, what kind of food and drink, e.g. Italian restaurant, real ale pub, and whether they are or were owned in Huddersfield, owned in the wider West Yorkshire region, or are national chains.
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. I will read them out and I've just emailed them to you so that you've got them there as well. So I agree with the overall sentiment of the question. It is really important that we do set some key performance indicators to be able to evidence whether or not the food hall has been a success or not. But what defines success is a broader question. The explicit aim of the food hall, and indeed the whole of our cultural heart, is to bring new visitors and new trips into the town centre, to give people additional reasons that they might want to come, to visit in the first place, to stay longer and to do more when they do. In other words, we believe our cultural heart will be additional and complementary to other existing offers, not aiming to displace them. Factors such as visitor numbers, overall footfall, dwell times will be key things that we will track, as well as more direct measures such as the financial viability of the food hall operators and customer satisfaction. The number of food and drink businesses in the town centre now and in the future, as in the way in which you've asked the question, is both A, difficult to collate with accuracy. Some of that data isn't data we hold currently, and B, is not solely going to be influenced by our Cultural Heart food hall. Whether or not the number and mix of F&B establishments is growing and evolving over time will be influenced by a wide range of factors, such as overall earnings in the economy, number of people living in the town centre, and other things that are going on in the town centre, not just Cultural Heart. So, for example, we talk a lot about the mutually reinforcing relationship of more people living in the town centre, which should promote more cafes, bars, restaurants and other leisure offerings. And the inverse of that, how more leisure offerings will help more people want to live in the town. So hopefully there are lots of other things that are going to be going on over the period of the food hall operating that is going to bring benefit to the town hall, not just that one specific intervention. And to be able to prove cause and effect between the food hall and the F&B operators and what else is going on won't be easy, but we should try. So on data specifically, we are exploring whether or not to purchase some new data. So I said we don't hold all of that information. We are able to purchase some of that data, which would allow us to track the sorts of changes that you are asking about over time. We need to decide whether we're doing that and exactly what the limitations of that data are. But I would be happy to share what data we are able to obtain in future to address this point.
Do you have a supplementary?
I do, yeah. Huddersfield already has a food hall upstairs at the Packhorse Centre and a night market for food and drink at Bates Mill once a month. How will you prevent unfair competition in which public money, for example, a marketing budget, is used in favour of the operator of the Queensgate food hall, your food hall, to take customers away from the Packhorse and Bates Mill and other food and drink businesses in the town centre?
Okay, so I think the first important principle is that the food hall in our Cultural Heart will need to operate commercially. The operator will, however, want to, no doubt, market the food hall as any commercial operator would. The council's marketing activity and the likes of the bid will continue to market the town centre overall. So we have an important role in marketing the whole town, not just one element of it. And that's where our resources will go. The operator will want to market their specific venue as any operator would, but that will be done on a commercial basis. We do, however, recognise that there are other good food hall operators in the town. We're confident that they can each find a differentiated offer and provide a range of choices, price points and experiences for customers, both new and existing. As with the answer I've just given earlier on, the aim is that taken together, these assets add up to a better overall offer, capable of attracting more visitors into the town and encouraging people to stay longer. So the size of the overall market in the town is grown for everybody rather than simply competing for the same number of existing customers in a zero-sum game. So we hope the strategy is that this is additional and grows the size of the market for everybody rather than just competing with each other with the current customer base.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like to ask your second question?
Yeah. In the discussion of the Kirklees Inclusive Economy Strategy at the Regeneration Scrutiny panel in December, we heard that Huddersfield and Kirklees lack higher order jobs. People in higher order jobs travel outside of Kirklees for those well-paid jobs. If people live and work in Kirklees, they are more likely to be in low-paid jobs. Council's ambition is to improve that situation so that there are more higher order jobs within Kirklees. So for each of this list of higher order jobs, I'm just going to read out a couple just to make the point about which kinds of jobs I'm talking about that are necessary. So a list of higher order jobs that are necessary to running the food hall. Please tell me how you will keep those well-paid jobs in Huddersfield or at least in Kirklees. So for example, owners and directors of the company that runs the food hall, corporate lawyers for the company that runs the food hall, accountants for the company that runs the food hall, the company that does the marketing for the food hall, etc., etc.
Okay. So given where we are in the process of appointing the food hall operator, we don't have the answers to all of those specific questions yet. That's ahead of us. But I can comment on the principles and the way in which the council would run the process. So all procurements undertaken by the council have a strong focus on social value. That is something we do really care about in Kirklees, and it is hardwired into all of our procurement processes. So the local impact of things like purchasing, recruitment, supply chains. Whilst the aim of the procurement exercise to appoint the food hall operator is to get the very best operator we can, the process will score things like local impact as part of the formal process. It is weighted, it is part of the formal process. It's not an add-on, it is absolutely hardwired into the procurement processes, all of our procurement processes. And then it doesn't stop there. Once appointed, we will be talking to them on a very regular basis to try and maximise the opportunity and the impact of their operations on the local economy. So again, that would be an ongoing conversation that we would be having with the operator at every opportunity.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, thank you for that. So the inclusive economy strategy has an ambition for there to be more alternative business models, meaning cooperatives and social enterprises in Kirklees, because these tend to have better wages for workers. Please could you explain the process by which you decided not to establish a cooperative business to run the food hall, and that would be a cast iron guaranteed way of keeping all of those higher order jobs within Huddersfield and Kirklees, or most of them. So what was the process by which you decided not to try and do that?
Okay, so as you say, it was an option. I mean, it is still possible that some of the proposals we get back could be from cooperatives and social enterprises, so it's not entirely ruled out. But you are correct, the council has not currently decided to set up our own cooperative. That decision, so the decision to seek to procure an operator for the food hall was based on a view of what other places are doing successfully, what's working well elsewhere in the marketplace, and stemming from a recognition that it's a very specialist field. There are a number of very successful operators, both locally and further afield, of similar venues who we think could do an excellent job, and we feel this gives us a better route to success than establishing a new venture ourselves from scratch in some form.
Thank you, that's it. That was a fair answer to that one as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Mr Wilson. Right, agenda item 7, the draft Kirklees Transport Strategy, Policy Themes and Consultation Plan. I'd like to invite officers to present the item and the Cabinet Member to introduce the report.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I'll give a quick introduction and then hand over to officers to give a bit more detail. This is our Kirklees Transport Strategy in draft form and en route to Cabinet for approval to progress to public consultation. So absolutely happy to take suggestions and comments from Scrutiny, which can be taken account in final versions. There's a lot being developed in transport at the moment regionally, with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Local Transport Plan in progress, as well as our Active Travel Position Statement, which has now been introduced. It's important to note that our draft strategy being considered here today is aligned with and complements the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Local Transport Plan. It's not intended to set us apart, but to help us to deliver local priorities and to contribute to delivering the overall regional plan. So our strategy reinforces application of the local transport plan in our local setting and ensures that our policies and ultimately the development of our transport offer through projects, etc., are compliant with and support the West Yorkshire aims, align with our other council priorities locally and meet the hyper-local needs of our communities here in Kirklees. Having our complementary transport strategy will help us to embed the aims of the local transport plan across the council and across all service areas. It's really positive that this strategy is being developed at the same time as so much transformative development is underway in our region, with mass transit, bus franchising and additional powers devolved to the mayoral authority through devolution. It allows us to maximise the benefit for our area, also ensures that all development is coordinated regionally and working towards delivering the same outcomes. Having our own strategy does, of course, also mean we can bring additional focus to specific areas that we want to prioritise in our local context, to support our regeneration and investment priorities, for example, but also to support our prioritisation of our net zero ambition through development of our active travel, modal shift and overall move towards sustainable transport locally. So finally, just to say that I think this is a fantastic draft strategy document that I'm sure will be adopted albeit with some amendments, through our governance process in due course. And I'd like to thank officers in the transport team for all the work they've done on this document. Thanks.
So just to follow up on what Councillor Crook has said there, the transport strategy presents an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we're complying as a district with the West Yorkshire Mayor and West Yorkshire Combined Authority's vision for transport, through which we as a local authority draw down large amounts and increasing amounts of investment through bids that we put forward to the Combined Authority and to other bodies such as the DFT, the Department for Transport. So this presents a good opportunity for us to consolidate the Council's position on transport matters across a range of themes, so that we can more successfully draw down that funding and bring those projects into the district. If I could just talk for a second on the approach that we're taking towards consultation. The consultation is anticipated to start in March of this year. We're anticipating that we give communities 8 weeks of a conversation that we'll be taking out there into the community with a number of events, including on-street events in some of our town centres, some areas of footfall, train stations, libraries, etc. And we're really keen that we have a true two-way conversation with our communities to ensure that we're capturing views of a broad range of stakeholders, including businesses, community groups, individual members of the public, and partners crucially as well. In the development of the draft strategy, which is going to consultation, we have done a lot of work behind the scenes with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, with our neighbouring districts inside and outside of West Yorkshire, including Rochdale and High Peak, to name a couple. And we're pleased that through that process we've been able to embed partners' thoughts and views into the draft strategy. So on the consultation going forward, we're looking to benchmark our understanding of who has responded, which will importantly allow us to target people who aren't responding partway through the consultation. So what we mean by that is we'll be asking people where they're coming from within the district, where they live, where they work, and we'll be asking the protected characteristics questions under the Equalities Act. That will, as I say, mean that if we are in a situation where we have underrepresentation from certain groups, we'll be able to target those groups and hopefully bring more of those people to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I take some questions?
Thank you, Chair. I have many problems with this proposal, but the most pertinent one is that certainly in my view, and I've got an academic background in the area, it is profoundly ableist. Now we do have a little bit of lip service, and I've just heard just this moment that we will be looking at people with protected characteristics. It seems to be a bit of an afterthought. Reading the presentation, it does say on, I believe, page 9 of the papers that, let me get it right, equality impact assessment is advisable. It doesn't actually say that it's been carried out. So the first point is, has it been carried out? If it has been carried out, how has it influenced the proposed strategy? And again, there's an integrated impact statement, which is a slightly different animal, I believe. I'm not convinced that has actually been carried out. Oh, sorry, I believe it does say it has been carried out. But I'm certainly not convinced it's in any way been considered. It doesn't seem to have influenced it. The base on which this policy is built, is that people are happy and able to take part in active travel. That's not the case. I'm not able to do that, and I'm not technically a disabled person. But I have certain medical conditions in my back, knees, hips. I can't walk 4 or 5 miles. It's just, I have not been, as a person with physical impairments, I've not been considered in this. And neither has anyone else with similar impairments. Or at least there's no evidence in this report that's been considered. I think this is shocking. We did have an equalities officer. I'm not certain whether there's still one in place. But has the equalities officer been involved in this? Because it has a profound impact on disabled people. And I'm not satisfied that it's been done properly. I'm not satisfied that the Equalities Act has been fully complied with. And I am, well, disgusted is perhaps too strong a word. I am deeply disappointed that the needs of less physically able people have just not been considered at all. So would the officers and members like to comment on that, Madam Chair?
Apologies. Some very important themes have been raised there around equalities and around how inclusive this as a piece of work needs to be for it to work. In terms of the views on active travel, we've been working closely with groups in the community who try and open up accessibility to active travel, including use of adaptive bikes for people with reduced mobility, and looking at how active travel can be extended out to people who do have a range of different needs. That said, the points raised are important ones about those who are unable or less able to travel actively. One of the strands within the strategy is about opening up choices to more of our residents, and that can mean that for those that do need to drive for journeys that they make, if certain other members of the community shift some of their journeys to walking and cycling or to public transport, that can in effect relieve capacity on the road network, so that, as I say, for those people that do need to drive, they are able to. Within the strategy, we have tried to come up with an approach that is truly inclusive, and we will be engaging with a number of groups who have different needs. We are conscious that individuals such as those who are blind and partially sighted, for example, those that have different accessibility needs, those who are with young families and have pushchairs, for example, many of these people do face difficulties as they travel around our district on our highways network, on public transport, and around our town and local centres. We are really keen that we bring a number of those individuals and representative community groups to the conversation so that we can take on board those views and ensure that those people with very specific needs are listened to. On the point about the Equalities Act and the Equalities Impact Assessment, that's something that is in progress at the moment. We have undertaken an impact assessment, but as I say, the Equalities Impact Assessment is in progress at the moment.
Yes, thank you. That's quite a comprehensive response. Doesn't totally reassure me, though. At least you are now acknowledging the potential impact on disabled people, which the initial report doesn't seem to. Not everybody can ride a bike, for example. I certainly can't. I have an inner ear problem, which means I don't have a good sense of balance. I would be dangerous on a bike. I am also a ward councillor for Kirkburton Ward, which consists of 10 villages separated by country lanes which actually carry a great deal of traffic, often at speed. They are not safe for people to walk along. For example, can imagine a parent or carer with a 12-month-old in a pushchair, 2.5-year-old toddler, and a 4.5-year-old making the way to school. It will be deadly on many of the roads in Kirkburton Ward. It's not a good idea, it's a dangerous idea. I'm not convinced that road safety has been taken into account. There's big differences between town wards, town centre wards, near town wards, and rural wards. And I don't think that the needs of residents of rural wards have been considered at all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So the points raised there on the specific needs of rural communities, again, are very important ones for those communities specifically, but for us as a district, given the proportion of our district which is made up of rural communities, and the difficulties which those communities face in terms of transport-related social exclusion, and also in terms of the impacts on local bus services in those communities over recent years, where a number of those communities have seen, unfortunately, a decline in bus service provision, and therefore an increased reliance on the private car. We do hope that in discussions that we're having with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, for example on bus franchising, and also within the policies within the strategy, we use this strategy to try and leverage more investment into those communities. So within the strategy itself, there's reference to demand responsive transport, which is an innovative way that rural communities can be served through in effect what is a minibus service which has flexible schedules and the potential for routing to be flexible to capture that what is in rural communities dissipated demand. We as a local authority obviously have limited control over bus service provision and limited ability to fund that, but I can assure members that there is a rural policy within the strategy and reference to that specific type of intervention which can help improve the rural transport needs. On the points that were raised about road safety, again, very, very important points. The strategy aligns to the Vision Zero approach, which the West Yorkshire Combined Authority is signed up to, and we as a district are endorsing as well. That relates to the ambition to achieve 0 road deaths and 0 seriously injured individuals on our roads going forward. Again, it's an important policy which aligns with a number of our wider health and wellbeing aims and our health and safety aims as well. Many of the questions raised about the existing pavement provision in rural communities directly apply to those policies as well, where a number of our villages, a number of our towns are currently underserved by, say for example, footways, pavements, cycle infrastructure, crossings, and we do hope that the policies within the strategy can be used to advocate for some of those things going forward.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Rory, and thanks, Bill, for your question. I just wanted to reassure you slightly that we are absolutely committed to making as many modes of transport accessible to as many people as possible across the borough. It's absolutely right that differently abled people will be able to access active travel or different modes of transport in different ways, but even people with reduced mobility will be able to walk to bus stops, for example. So if we facilitate more access to multimodal transport links, that will allow people to be more mobile and to be more connected to communities. So, for example, if you can get a short distance to a bus stop, and hopefully, in particular, rural bus routes will be improved through the franchising process which is underway regionally, and then have good connections between the bus terminus and train stations, for example. That allows people to be much more connected and much more able to travel across the district and beyond. We absolutely also have an ambition with reference to your question around, or your comments around the safety of people walking on rural roads. Absolutely have an ambition for a traffic-free network across the borough, and we've gone through various processes through the LC Whips programme to develop that ambition and establish a sort of ready network of active travel routes which we can seek funding for and develop over time. I would like to see people being able to travel between our rural centres without having to go, without having to endanger themselves on the side of busy A roads and so on. My ward, like yours, is a rural ward, also encumbered by some hills, which make active travel more challenging for some people, but we do have options there with the electric assist bikes and so on, and additional mobility choices for people who are perhaps not fit enough to cycle up the steep hills. Just finally, on safety, so the evidence is that people who habitualise themselves to active travel earlier in life will have longer and more healthy lives. So albeit that they're exposed to some additional risk through being pedestrians when there are more potentially dangerous vehicles on the roads, the health benefits and other benefits of engaging in active travel and persisting with that through life outweigh those risks over that lifetime. So it isn't quite as straightforward as just walking, you're in danger from a car. Actually walking, you're less in danger of heart disease and other health issues that will keep you active and happier and healthier for longer. So a complex question, but not one that we haven't been considering in detail. Thank you.
Do you have another question?
If I may, more of a comment, but if I may, Madam Chair. Well, the message I'm receiving here, partly a welcome message, but what it has convinced me, as I've sat here and listened, is that this strategy is premature. There are so many other bits and pieces that need to be in place, whether it's rural transport through a combined authority, whether it's improved roadside pavements, whatever. There are so many other bits and pieces that need to be in place. It's too early, it's premature to try to introduce a strategy in the absence of those important factors. Thank you.
Would officers like to respond?
Timing is a very important question around a piece of work as wide-ranging as this, given the impacts that the strategy will have across a number of council services. We've considered the timing of the strategy in detail around some of the other moving parts within the district at the moment. One of them that I referred to is bus franchising, where the West Yorkshire Combined Authority is moving towards a position where bus franchising, looks extremely likely to be coming forward, and it's hoped that the strategy being in place before the adoption of that will allow us to have more leverage in some of the conversations that we as a local authority would like to have once the bus franchising process is underway, and once the network planning phase of that is being looked at. What's happened in other areas is bus franchising has come in, and then network planning has followed that very closely. So we are hoping that by having a strategy which has a clear marker in the ground around some of the topics such as road safety, such as the Vision Zero approach, such as some of the questions that were raised earlier about economy, the access to jobs, skills and employment, we're hopeful that with bus franchising being one example, having a strategy which is consulted upon and then hopefully adopted later in the year, we will have a clear position that we as Kirklees decision makers can use to advocate with going forward. Just on another few themes as well around timing. The West Yorkshire Combined Authority is bringing in a number of new funding streams, and we are in a position where other districts are in more of an advanced policy position, and that's allowing them to draw down funding with more certainty and more reassurance to the funders that they're trying to bid from, given that they have a clear policy position on a number of these things. And as I say, they can then provide more certainty to funders on the corporate and political will to deliver, and on the, as I say, the ability for them to advocate for that funding going forward. One of those particular funding streams is the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. We're expecting to be entering the next phase of that, which is a multi-billion pound programme, and we are hoping that that being well placed in a policy position will then hopefully allow us to draw down more of that funding and bring more of the investment into Kirklees for some of those improvements that that the member has mentioned there.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I've got one observation, if I may, and one question. Just going back to what Councillor Crook was saying there, there are a lot of very dark, non-pavement roads around the region. But I think as well as car drivers and a transport strategy, there is a person strategy that needs to be addressed, which is don't go out at night in black when there are no lights. Wear something luminous, wear something so you can be seen. The number of times I see people walking around Baltimore all dressed in black on their way back from maybe the Golka Lily, and it's very difficult to see them in the evening. So I think it would be nice to have something in here about the pedestrian's role in this net zero strategy. That's my observation. I don't need to come back on it. I'm sure you'll address it at some point. Or did I miss it?
No, I'm very happy to. I mean, absolutely agree with you. But I think that's more an education piece, isn't it? So encouraging people to adopt behaviours which support their health and well-being through their lives, but also to do that in a way which minimises any risk that confers onto them as people. I think the highways safety team do a lot of work, which is in a slightly different portfolio area, but the highways safety team do a lot of work in terms of education in schools and so on around active travel, around highways safety. So certainly an important issue. Thank you.
I'm not sure it's getting through because the people I saw the other night were runners, all in black. You know, why run at night in black? No. Anyway, hopefully that you'll get your message across to them. Right, my real question is around the council plan. It says on page 9 of the full set of documents, the transport strategy is centred around 5 key strategic objectives. Now, we held earlier from a member of the public about measuring things, and sort of my previous employment was all about measuring objectives. When I look at the 5 key objectives, I'm not convinced I could see the strategy having something that could be measured. I mean, improving health and well-being, 1%, 20%, how would you measure it? Protecting our environment, again, you know, what does that actually mean in terms of something that's measurable? How would you know you'd achieve that objective? Transforming public transport investments. Is there something that could be measurable put on that? How much do you want to achieve the investment by? Nurturing inclusive communities. Nurturing is not really a sort of word I could use as an adjective. It's sort of a soft word. If you want to build inclusive communities, or increase inclusive communities, or something like that, some words that are really relevant, and developing an inclusive economy. I look at those and I say, what measures could I put against those that I could say they've been achieved? Have you got some measurements around those that could be achieved? Reading the document and the presentation, I couldn't see anything in there that says, this is how we're going to measure these objectives.
So, yeah, thanks. I mean, it is really important that we identify what success looks like when we do any piece of work in the council. I think this is a strategy document rather than, a project, so we don't have identified specific outcomes in the same way as perhaps we would at project stage. But I totally take your point about that. The 5 key strategic aims, I think, are about identifying areas where we would like to see benefit. And actually, in terms of quantifying what the benefit will be and what success looks like, that's a slightly different piece of work. But I don't know if Rory or Ed would want to come in and be more specific about that.
Can I just say you used a different word there? You said aims, not objectives. Aims is more what these are, not
the strategies that's put forward to members today, we hope is a format which is similar to that which will go out to consultation. Officers working on the strategy are keen that we gain the views from members of the community, from businesses, from individuals, so that we can receive comments on the objectives, on the vision, on the overall policies contained within the strategy, and then we absolutely will be looking towards how we can define targets in line with the objectives. Within our governance makeup, if I put it that way, transport sits broadly at a city regional level. So West Yorkshire Combined Authority are deemed as the transport authority within our 2-tier city regional context. The Combined Authority has set its own targets around themes such as mode share, so the proportion of people making journeys by certain modes, around journey times, around reliability for a number of modes as well. Officers within Kirklees were keen that we don't conflict or contrast with the targets that are set at a West Yorkshire level, which we hope our transport strategy will deliver. As I say, it's a really important point that's made there about how we measure and how we track what is in the strategy, so we can present an idea of whether the strategy is effective or not. So, as I say, within the consultation version, the approach towards targets isn't in there, but we'll be looking to, as I say, adhere to the targets which have already been set at West Yorkshire level, and have a look at if that needs looking at again for the final version of the strategy.
Supplementary. So I actually have a question, and it centres around net zero target and the government's commitment towards electric charged vehicles. Presently, we've got, and I couldn't even quote how many houses within Kirklees district that don't have off-street parking. So I see that as a barrier towards achieving that. And then if we are to provide this facility on street, how would you balance that visually?
EV charging is a very the implementation of EV charging nationally, internationally, is something that has been demonstrated to be a challenge, and the challenges that have been raised there around certain types of residential property. You know, if you picture a terraced street where individuals that live in those houses park on street, there are challenges when we look at how individuals will charge EV electric vehicles parked in that type of setting. Looking at the strategy, the policies contained within the strategy around EV mention supporting the rollout of EV charging, so that we as a council support the private sector actors, the combined authority, national highways around EV charging, and that we as a council support the rollout of those charging facilities where feasible. But given the technology, given the pace of change, given the conflicting technologies that are out there, we aim to put in place a policy around EV and around future alternative fuels, which is flexible, because we as a local authority will have limited control over the overall approach that is taken towards EV adoption and the rollout of charging facilities as I say, a type of technology going forward. That said, we do have a really important role when it comes to our highways permissions, when it comes to our planning approach as well. And by adopting a policy which is pro-EV charging rollout and pro-alternative technologies, we do hope that we can embed the rollout of more EV charging within some of those decisions going forward, as I say, around some of the planning decisions that are made and around some of the highways decisions that are made going forward. Going back to that strategic point, I think the rollout of EV charging has been slower than many industry experts anticipated 5 or 10 years ago. There was a case recently around BT hoping to roll out a programme of several thousand chargers and closing their programme, only having delivered one in recent years. So that is an example of where the industry has struggled, and as I say, technologies are being looked at, and we as a district have a policy which I hope will do what it can to roll out EV charging. On people who do need to drive and who do have a traditionally powered car, a petrol or diesel car, there are policies in the strategy which do acknowledge that the pace of change and the needs of our individual residents are, to be honest, in a state of flux, and there is a lot of change that the market will deliver going forward. So as I say, there's many actors in the market, such as the car companies, the national grid, and I do hope that the policies set out within the strategy do try and bring forward the implementation and rollout of EV charging within our district.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, not a great deal to add. Rory's given most of the detail there. I think, so I absolutely think that we've got a role to play, as Rory's identified, in ensuring that people have access to EV charging and access to EV cars. I think views vary a little bit, but the level of investment that car companies have put into electric vehicles means that, at least for the medium term, our personal transport mode is going to move towards electric cars, and so we need to work in that context. I am very concerned that we ensure that we look at ways to not differentiate between areas of different affluence. So richer areas tend to have more drives, more capacity to put charging on their drives. I don't want there to be a situation where there are two tiers. You know, there are people struggling with older internal combustion engine cars, and only richer people can afford or have the facility to have electric cars. There's lots of different sort of mechanisms for getting EV charging to work in areas where housing is straight onto the street. Gullies cutting to the pavement, I don't think that's going to be very popular with highways colleagues. Charging coming out of lighting columns, that's probably something we can look at. Also, I think we have a role to play in ensuring that car parks have electric charge points near to areas where there is no off-street parking, because the likelihood is that technology will move quite quickly to a faster charging for electric cars, and so it will be more like a refueling than an overnight charge. And if we can make sure there is sufficient capacity in public car parks, then people will be able to park their car for a short period of time or in the evening or whatever, get a charge which will probably last them a week. So it's not necessary to have a charge point at everyone's home address, albeit that there's a difference in price currently between charging in a public charger or charging on a cheap tariff overnight. So I think making sure that we ensure access for all of our communities across Kirklees is something where we need to maintain focus. Yeah, I think that's enough. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, officers, for presenting this. There's just a few comments I've made. First one was about, on page 9, the map. It looks like Slough has lost its train station, but Linthwaite has gained one. So if we could have the train station back, that would be greatly appreciated. It's part of this follows on from what Chris was saying, but as a broader, I think the strategy is good. It's identified some good objectives, what we want to see from transport in Kirklees, and some good policies. But what's missing probably is the particular actions and also the measurables in terms of following this up. Like in 5 years' time, what will we measure to see that these policies have been a success or a failure? I appreciate it's difficult because a lot of these actions would be held by partners like Wicker, for example, but still, I think we need to sort of maybe see something that kind of what is success and what failure and how to define that. One thing I would say, I think every councillor here is from a partly rural ward at least, and one of the things that I find, the reason why people use cars so much and can't use public transport is basically because public transport tends to go from outlying villages into the town centre, and it doesn't kind of use those kind of orbital routes between different villages. People's, you know, I used to work, we used to have, where I used to work, we used to have sites in Honley, Clayton West, Birchincliffe and Slough, and getting between those villages by public transport was basically impossible, particularly in the early morning and the late evening. So it'd be good to see something about kind of, about that. Finally, about kind of, I think I have mentioned it in the committee before, but about, it's not an action for Kirklees, but about one of the things that people at Slough and Marsden Station passenger groups have been looking for is up to 2 passenger trains per hour to and from Leeds and Manchester. It just helps again when we've got the council kind of lobbying for something. So those are just my comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So on the point about actions and having measurable targets within the strategy, as we answered to the previous question, it's something that we could perhaps underline within the future versions of this around the West Yorkshire-wide strategy, the West Yorkshire targets around mode shift and around punctuality, reliability, for example. Also, we can take that one away for the final version of the document around how targets will be embedded into this piece of work to ensure that officers are able to cross-check the policies that are in there against the real-world successes, failures, or otherwise within the strategy. On the point that was made about rural connectivity between villages and around orbital routes, that's a reality for many of our citizens at the moment, where if individuals are making journeys between sparsely populated centres or are making journeys that don't necessarily go between some of our major settlements or in and out of major settlements in surrounding districts, there are challenges around the frequency of routes, around the availability of routes, and also in recent times we as officers are hearing more and more about criticism of the actual buses turning up at all. When we do look towards franchising, there is hope, if I put it that way. We will be in a position where we as a local authority will be able to use the policies within this strategy to advocate for change in some of those rural areas when West Yorkshire Combined Authority are looking at their future bus network planning. That's something that Greater Manchester is beginning to do at the moment. So all of Greater Manchester, as many of you will have seen, is now under a franchised approach as of this month, and the Transport Authority there has been able to look at extending new bus routes, extend first and last journey times as well, so that individuals are able to make those journeys earlier in the morning and later in the evening, and there'll be ability for some of the profitable routes in and out of some of the local centres where there will be more individuals travelling on each bus and therefore more fare box revenue to be able to subsidise some of the services that the member has talked about there between rural communities. That will take time, and it's something that we as a local authority do have limited control over in this current context. But when we do reach a situation where bus franchising comes in, we as a district may have more ability to advocate for change within some of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority forums that we do have.
Any additional comments? Councillor Lee Richards.
Right, thank you, Chair. There's a lot of positive stuff in this document, but if I could mention page 8, where it says we have an extensive network of greenways. I would like to dispute that at the moment. I think some of our greenways are patchy or broken, e.g. the Meltham Greenway. The only stretch in South Kirklees doesn't go anywhere other than onto a busy and unwelcoming B6108. There's no safe route from Huddersfield Town Centre to the Birkby Bradley Greenway. The Calder Valley Greenway is broken in Murfield, where people on cycles are expected to mix with the traffic on the A644. And the Spen Ringway doesn't connect back up with the Spen Valley Greenway at Heckman White because of the Heckman White deep cutting ransom strip. And there's no real connection between the Calder Valley Greenway and the Ossett Greenway. Wilton Greenway also sits alone nowhere near any other greenway, and it also lacks any safe connections to Batley or Birstall because of busy road junctions at the end of the routes. So I admire your aims, but I don't think we can at the moment say we've got an extensive network of greenways at the moment. So I'm hoping we're going to see improvements when we start getting funding from Wicker for those people who want to actively cycle. I'm not a big cyclist myself, despite having access to an e-bike, because I'm too afraid to cycle into Huddersfield. So I'm afraid my bike has sat in the utility room unused for the best part of a year. Hopefully, if I feel safer in future, I will shift to more cycling and less driving. And one other comment I'd like to make about page 21. When we're talking about shifting some trips to more sustainable modes of transport by switching away from private cars, encouraging this mode shift, and for people to drive using the best option. What do we mean by best? Quickest, cheapest, safest, most fuel efficient? What do we mean by best in that instance? I applaud the encouragement towards active travel, but we still do have to accommodate the people who have no alternative. You know, our bus routes at the moment, our bus service is poor, and I know that isn't up to us to fix. We have to work with Wicker and hope that that's improved. But then we've got places like we're developing Dewsbury Riverside, where we're getting a significant residential development, but we haven't got any active travel links yet sorted for that. And I think behaviour change, we need to encourage it from the outset so people do have alternatives. Otherwise, we just end up with more people thinking, I've got to have a car for all my essential journeys because I've no alternative. So please, I hope those are going to be worked on and developed as this transport strategy goes forward for consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for identifying some important points. I think there was a little bit of crossover in terms of measurable outcomes there with the points that Councillor McCarthy had made as well. On the greenways, I mean, so I absolutely agree. We could have a much better network of non-traffic routes for active travel. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I don't think you'd find any argument from anyone in the transport team with driving as hard as we can in that direction. It's incumbent we need to get funding from Wicker in order to develop a lot of those schemes. To do that, we need to have developed an aspirational network, and then from that develop projects that we can bid into for funding to deliver specific components. There are some underway. Meltham to Netherton Greenway, for example, we're poised to start developing the next stage of that, but it does take a long time. I take your point about the language, perhaps identifying that we have an excellent network already. There may be an aspirational component in that description, so we'll take that comment away and possibly change the language a little bit. In terms of mode shift, the phrase that I always come back to and really like is making it the easy and obvious choice. So it isn't just as straightforward as saying making it cheaper. I think if you look at places where there's a very successful non-car mode usage, so in London or perhaps in some European cities, it isn't that the buses are luxurious and comfortable, or it isn't that they cost almost nothing. It's a combination of factors. What you need to do is, without being anti-car, encourage people, motivate people to use these other modes. If it's the quickest way, if it's the way that gets you nearest to work with least trouble, if it's the way that doesn't give you problems with parking, if it's the way that doesn't get you caught in congestion, these are all contributory factors. So from a strategy perspective, we can talk about perhaps space allocation for public transport. That means that the buses get through much faster than cars can. We can talk about funding through the franchising model and make sure that we've got new modern buses that are fit for purpose. We need to talk absolutely about, and focusing on bus, we need to talk absolutely about reliability of service. I think it's a real problem if you're relying on a bus to get home and there's there's a ghost bus incident, the bus just doesn't turn up, you've got no information about it, and there's no alternative way to get home. So I think it's a multiple set of factors that need to lead to that modal shift. But it is something that I'm confident we will be able to deliver. Just quickly on buses as well, I have a higher degree of confidence that franchising will deliver improvement than Rory. We do have a say in the way that that's managed through Wicker. We're very lucky to have three members from my group on the Transport Committee, and there are other political representations there as well. So we will be part of that conversation. Obviously, when franchising begins, it will be taking on a network that's in the something like the route distribution that it has now, but very quickly we'll be able to add additional routes and to make sure that those routes serve communities instead of serving profit, or at least are not simply driven by commercial viability of the route. I think that speaks to Harry's point as well around radial route provision. It is true that a lot of the routes are like, spokes of a bicycle wheel, let's say, into the centres, but actually some transport need is between peripheral centres in our region. Certainly, I don't think I can get a bus from where I live to where Councillor McCarthy lives, for example. Certainly not with any reliability or frequency. With the specific example that you identified about Dewsbury Riverside and there not being an active travel route identified as yet, I've certainly been doing some work on that. Would absolutely love to see that identified. There wasn't at that stage any capacity within the Section 106 available to make that work immediately, but I think my colleague, Councillor Turner, will be able to give you a bit more detail on that.
Thank you. You touched on Dewsbury Riverside. Don't forget, it'll have a state-of-the-art train station very close to it when Transfinance finished. There's no designs yet. We haven't got a layout. We haven't got any indicative designs because we're still looking to get the funding in place through Homes England to get actually onto the site. But I'm absolutely convinced that once we get to that point, there will be we will look at all methods of getting people in and out of those houses, whether it be walking, cycling, and using the as I said, the state-of-the-art train station, which is coming on quite nicely now. So with all those will be looked at, but we're nowhere near that stage at the moment. But I can assure you, at the right time, those will be looked at.
Right. Supplementary.
Thank you. No supplementary.
Thank you. Thank you, officers, for presenting the item, and Cabinet members as well. Jenny, can we call back in Councillor Munro? Just before we go on to item 8, we just wanted to call back Councillor Munro. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is community asset transfer. Can I invite officers to present this item, and would Cabinet Member like to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you. This is an update report on where we are with our asset strategy, and officers will now present you with the updated report.
I think so.
Just share your screen. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting us today to talk about the community asset transfer process in Kirklees. I'm going to set the context. I'm going to rely on my colleague Mark to fill in a bit of the detail for you, and then I'll wrap it up at the end. So firstly, a slide which I think neatly illustrates the breadth of the transfers that we've done in the past. From the Civic Hall in Slowett in the top left, through to areas like the Staincliffe Community Garden in the centre of the screen, and down to Meltham Carlisle Institute, so a wide variety. And I think this illustrates really the cornerstone of our approach, which is one of flexibility, and hopefully that will come out during the presentation. We do understand that all communities are different. We do understand that all community groups are different. And certainly our buildings and our assets are all quite different from each other. So our approach is tailored. The policy is tailored to deliver this flexibility, and it enables officers and community groups to come together to cooperate and make sure that the model that results is good for both sides. So what are we talking about? The transfer of ownership and management of public land and buildings from the council to a community organisation. And clearly, the last thing we want to do is saddle communities and community groups with unnecessary debts. So we do that at a value which ensures they have a good chance of success and delivers social, economic or environmental benefits to the communities. The purpose of CATS is really to, I think, bring to life the council's long-standing commitment as an enabling council. We want to invest in our communities, and we want to help communities to do that. We want to understand, we want to listen to communities, we want to understand their aspirations and help them to deliver that on the ground. So this, I think, is a really good example of how we bring that aspiration, that enabling aspiration, to life and make it concrete, or at least to make it bricks and mortar. So, CATS in Kirklees. The community asset transfer policy we currently have was updated in September 2020 and is the third iteration of the policy. Each time we've worked to understand what's gone well and what needs work. And we think the result, the 2020 policy, is a good example of how the community asset transfer policy can run in practice. So far, over something like the last 20 years, 27 CATs have been completed to date. 16 across the south and 11 across the north of the district. And as you'll have seen from the picture slide, there's a wide variety within that. Civic halls, community centres, libraries, parks, and mechanics halls. So the policy. Clearly, it's developed to support the council's corporate vision, and like I described, its aim is to enable communities to deliver the services that they require. It was developed in consultation with a wide variety of stakeholders, including elected members, the third sector, of course our legal services colleagues, and the corporate landlord service from an asset management perspective. The policy sets out a clear and transparent framework for the asset transfer process, why and what assets will be considered for transfer, the eligibility criteria, so when a community group is looking at an asset transfer, they can be clear on how they can meet those eligibility criteria. The conditions of the transfer and how we aim to process the transfer, how we aim to work closely with those groups to identify their aspirations, to bring them to life and work with them to make sure we give them the best opportunity possible to actually complete the transfer process. Mark.
So the conditions of an asset transfer that we put within the policy, all transfers in Kirklees are by a long leasehold. Each case is negotiable. We can negotiate each case. There's flexibility within the policy to negotiate, but the default presumption is that all transfers will go by on a 125-year lease. We came away from freehold transfers when we redesigned the policy in 2020, but we will still consider freehold transfers in what we consider our exceptional circumstances. And to date, those exceptional circumstances have been to a parish and council. We'll freehold transfer to a parish council. We find that we put this in the long leaseholds, it gives the applicant the security needed to satisfy grant funders, whilst at the same time it provides the council with remedies in the event that circumstances should change within the parish. There's a breach of condition to adherence to the terms, or a group comes into trouble, and we can step back in and provide that support to groups. What we find is that it establishes that and ensures an ongoing relationship between community groups, our community, and the council. So it's not to be overbearing or controlling, it's that supportive relationship as we move forward on these long-term transfers. Covenants are included within the lease to ensure that the asset is predominantly restricted to community use. It allows a percentage of commercial activity within that lease so that can support a group or organisation's business model in running the asset. The council reserve a right to use all or part of an asset where it's required to either deliver a statutory function or to use that asset for a polling station on election days. They go with a hosting agreement. And upon completion of a transfer, an organisation or a community group will become fully responsible for all upkeep, repair and maintenance of the asset, all running costs and insurance for the asset, and all compliance and statutory inspections, health and safety and all other relevant legislation. The process and indicative timescales, so we try and set out, which is sometimes ambitious, we try and look at a 9 to 12 month process from start to finish. Go into detail, we don't always achieve that, but that's our aim. We're set off. So the first stage of an asset transfer process is an expression of interest, whereby the council can either receive an expression of interest from an incumbent group who are currently managing an asset, or the council have taken a decision that an asset is now surplus to the council requirements and can be put forward for an asset transfer and will be advertised as such to local community groups within that area. When we receive an asset assessment of an expression of interest, the council officers will assess that expression and will respond to a group within 4 weeks about whether we're willing to proceed with that business model or proceed with that group and offer. And a successful group will then be asked to put through to full application and business case. And that's an applicant group. We set in the policy a time frame of 9 to 12 weeks, but that's not something we've ever enforced because we always appreciate that we're working with voluntary groups and voluntary organisations and people who are putting their own time into this. So It's good if we get them quick, but we don't enforce that. So we'll give groups as long as possible to put together a successful business plan. We get the council officers get that in, and we will respond. We have an assessment panel that will go through an assessment process that includes relevant council departments such as the third sector, our audit and risk and audit team, colleagues within our active citizens groups, and any specialist advice. We might have a particular asset that has a specialist area that we can bring that advice into assessment, and we will respond to groups, all be well, within 4 weeks to give them an answer as whether that's been successful, and this will go via an asset transfer. All asset transfers need Cabinet approval. They're all ultimately decided by Cabinet. So we'll take a report through to Cabinet. When we've reached an agreement with the group, we will send that to Cabinet for a decision. Again, we look at the time frames. That can be a 6 to 10 week process. And then once we've got that decision, we will finalise the terms. So we'll agree some heads of terms with the group, which we set out a 6 to 8 week period, and then it'll go into legal, and there'll be that legal completion. So all in all, that's a 12-month project, but the reality is that these will probably take between 12 and 24 months, sometimes taking on board various issues internally or externally that come up, and the issues that we deal with along the way. Within the policy, we have financial support within that policy to groups when we set out. We offer a development grant of up to £10,000, which can be used at the full application stage for groups to look at paying professional fees, for surveys, if they need condition surveys or structural surveys for an asset, to get that information together, and then to get any legal advice. If they want to approach a solicitor and they need funding to get that advice, they can apply for that. And we have an assessment process. Groups can apply, and then we assess that, and we make a decision. It was previously £5,000 in the policy before, but we realised that sometimes we're dealing with complex, large assets that might need a bit more funding to put into them, so we brought that into the new policy in 2020. It's in the policy that applicants can apply to the council for funding in order to fund urgent condition works within a building, or to fund physical adaptations to the asset that will improve accessibility, and that's for us to try to ensure that an asset is usable from day one of an asset transfer, and they can get used in that building. So if things like boilers or a roof, or they can come to the council and ask for that support, and the council will deal with that on a case-by-case basis, and obviously will make a decision. And then we also provide a match funding loan for groups of up to £100,000, so they can approach the council for a loan. And what we can do now, that can either be applied for when the Cabinet decision is going through, or they can return to the council down the line and seek a funding arrangement with the council loan to put in place to fund capital works on that building. And we also provide a contribution to the revenue funding for the running costs in year 1 and year 2. I think we have 15% of the running costs in year 1 we will give, and the second year it goes down to 5%, just to give that initial support in revenue, where sometimes groups can struggle to find revenue funding for putting into buildings when we move forward. There's also additional support available to groups internally through the council via we give a lot of support from our colleagues in the third sector teams and active citizen teams. Are you all right? Sorry, yeah. So to give them help with their governance and getting things into place, expression of interest, a bit, so they can rely on colleagues in the council to give them that support on an ongoing basis. We also commission external support. That's at the moment we have a national provider called Locality, a charity network, and they have a broad experience of asset transfers to give us and lend into the council. So that contract gives us a critical frame for Kirklees and advice, which helps us with keep in line with current best practice. We get that internal advice. They provide direct support to groups with their business models, capital project development, funding bids and procurement they can support groups with. And then we can ask them to run network meeting sessions for groups to provide that ongoing support, post-transfer workshops. We can offer bespoke training sessions should funding become available. And it gives groups to develop their knowledge and skills for managing assets as they move forward. And the overall aim of that support is obviously to delivery of successful and sustainable community asset transfers within Kirklees. So through the process, that our thoughts and learning is it's a community-led approach to CATS. The transfers are driven by the community rather than being asset-led, so it's how these assets can meet the needs and aspirations of the community, and we look to the community for that advice. We recognise the vital role that assets sometimes play in supporting those communities and the opportunities it presents in our asset transfer process. We need to recognise that the capacity and the ability to take up CATS varies across the district, and we might need to give extra support or different support in various districts across Kirklees. And we've always said it we're keen that we'd go the extra mile to provide that support at the council. We know the value, or what we've realised is the value of both pre and post transfer support to groups to ensure that long-term success and sustainability. So that ongoing relationship with groups is vital for us, and being able to step in and provide support when it's required with them. We found that the policy, we tried to come up with a policy that don't put us into any cul-de-sacs where we can allow flexibility and negotiations, because each asset transfer is different. Each group has different requirements and different needs, so we like to have a flexible approach that can be negotiated. And then we try and prioritise assets for transfer and decisions through making sure that we've got robust decision making around assets and what we make available, and how we make those final decisions as to things moving forward. And then challenges that we face are ongoing, you know, in keeping with a lot of local authorities and out there in the communities. We've got council's economic circumstances. We always have competing priorities for assets, both internally in the council and externally within communities. We carefully manage expectation, or try to, around asset transfers, you know, for both with community organisations and within the council internally. We've got to, the challenge is the capacity in the community to take on some of these complex challenges. There can be big liabilities, so we're careful around the capacity and looking at that. Access to and availability of external funding. There's been a fall in that sometimes, that we're reporting back from our colleagues, so we're mindful of what funding is. And then the timescales are always a challenge. There's a lot of pressure sometimes around timescales, and it's trying to make these as quick as possible, really, but ensuring that we end up with a sustainable solution. So I hope that's answered what people are expecting. If any questions, please just answer back.
Thank you for your presentation. I actually have a couple of questions. It's probably a bit more detailed, but are there any asset transfer buildings where the buildings have been returned to the council, and the reasons for this?
No, we've not had a failed asset transfer as yet.
That's really positive. You say the average length of time is between 12 and 24 months. Has it ever gone beyond that? And if so, the reason for it?
It has gone beyond that. We've had, it sort of depends what complications we come up in a specific transfer. So I think we had one at Honley Library. We had a number of complications that came up as we were developing that, and I think that went over the 24-month. And then we had one at Netherton, that went over the period, and that was, sometimes we're just waiting. With these legal completions can take a long time. We just wait for feedback to come from external solicitors. And then we've had one at Onley that's perhaps going to delay. Sometimes we've got internal resources about some of the things that we need to provide towards these asset transfers. But we try and engage with groups and keep them in, and make sure that we have good communication with groups.
This is part of the flexibility that we were describing, really. Working with community groups, all with different capacities, all made up from different types of people with their own lives and commitments. And then sometimes there's technicalities, like through, I think recently, our leaving Europe caused difficulties because we had state aid rules were in place, but we had to find a workaround for that process. So that took a while as the lawyers kind of cogitated on how we could still deliver this. So yeah, it's not really one thing or another. Each CAT has a different reasons, I think, why they sometimes extend.
Yeah, just to add to that, the timescales can be challenging because there's lots of things that get thrown up when the legal teams get involved, and there's all sorts of perhaps checks and balances that need to be done. I remember I've been involved with this since its conception, and I remember one of the first ones we did, which was a building that was going to go to parish council, and still this will be dead easy. It wasn't dead easy because it was one of the first ones, we started to look into what was required. It was incredibly complicated. You had to still unravel things like alarm contracts, heating contracts, lift contracts, water testing, all those sort of things that the council just did. Somebody else had to take on, and they were in contract with people. So again, legal people involved. So they can be incredibly complicated. We've got better at it because we've learned a lot of lessons. But from what we went, this will be dead easy. When we started to dig into it, the complexities around it was really, really challenging. But we've got better at it. But there will always be those complexities because when it's a council building, we do everything at the moment, don't we? We do everything. We look after that building, we do all the contracts, and we pass on to someone else, and we have to say to them, who's going to do fire safety for you? Who's going to do your electrical testing? All those sort of things. So they can be complicated to unravel some of those contracts. So that's part of the process why it takes some time. And we are working with volunteers. So it's only right that we work with them and let them take their time to get to the right outcome rather than pushing them and getting to the wrong outcome. As being pointed out, we've managed to do all these and not had one failure. I think that's something that the community in Kirklees should be rightly proud of, and our officers, that we've made the right decisions all the way through this process.
Absolutely, I agree. Question, Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to know about the success rate, the number of transfers that have been successful, how many have been unsuccessful. I know that you say you work closely with groups to complete the transfer process, but I've worked with a group on a community asset transfer, and that wasn't apparent. And the other thing is, when there are competing priorities for assets, how do you communicate that to community groups? Thank you.
I think we just said that they've all been successful and they've all survived. So I think that's your answer there.
Sorry, my first question probably wasn't clear. I'm just wondering how many CAT applications you've received that haven't been successful, that haven't actually gone to completion. Have you compared to how many have been successful?
I think obviously I need to answer because I'm not aware of any, but...
We've had 3. As far as I'm aware, I'll have to check my files when I get back into the office, but I can think of 3 off the top of my head that didn't go forward in the asset transfer process. One was Dewsbury Park Mansion that was abandoned by the organisation. It was very complex at the time, and that was abandoned. It didn't go through at the time. We're at Fartown Village Hall that didn't go through as a community asset transfer again, due to complications and not laying that on anybody. You know, it just got abandoned and didn't move forward, that one. And then obviously we had Almonbury Library that wasn't successful. I think, yeah.
Can I just add to that? Some of those ones that in effect didn't progress, certainly the Fartown and Dewsbury, I think it's fair to say that the people came forward with the best will in the world to try and do these things, but they weren't. There was no established group at either of those organisations. When you're trying to come to set up an organisation to do something, it becomes incredibly difficult. Where you have an established group that's using that building, it's much, much easier to come in to say, we want to save Dewsbury Mansion, let's form a small group. When you've got a building that needs there's the challenges, that was probably always going to be a stretch too far for that group, despite the best efforts. And the same with Fartown Village Hall. You need an incumbent group to make this work. Otherwise, it's really, really challenging. And people don't understand the complexities of it. But so incumbent groups have all been successful.
So my second question was in connection with how is that communicated when there are competing priorities for assets?
when we have a building that may be up for asset transfer, we advertise that this building may be available for community asset transfer, and then we liaise with the group on a regular basis, as officers pointed out. We work with them hand in glove to get through this process. I don't know what more communication we could do. As I say, we're very close to these organisations, we're very close to their legal teams, and where they have trustees. So I'm not sure what extra communication we need to do, what we could do.
Shall I just elaborate, Chair? It's just in connection with Almonbury Carnegie Library, when there was a potential competition over the asset, as the group wanted to go down the community asset transfer route, and they were doing, but also the council was kind of looking to sell it, to dispose of it. So I just wondered about, that communication process.
I'm sorry, if you're going to pick an Almonbury Library, but the communication process with Almonbury Library was intense. I was there on regular occasions talking to them. I spent the Sunday before Christmas one year driven in the snow and the ice to go and talk to them. So there was a constant dialogue between ourselves and me with the Almonbury Library. There was no plans to sell it until that process had been completed. And as soon as that process had been completed, it was obvious that they weren't going to be able to perform an asset transfer, then it went to the disposal list. Almonbury Library dragged on for probably 6 to 7 years. It was well before COVID, so I refute the fact that we didn't communicate. I spent a lot of time in there personally talking to them at public meetings, private meetings, so I refute that.
I wasn't actually saying that that you didn't.
We did.
Anyway, okay, well, whatever. I just wanted to know how the process worked. That's all. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if there's sort of a minimum level of asset that you take through this process. And the reason I'm asking this is because a few years back there was a small piece of land up at Bolston Moor, it was probably about half an acre, that we were invited as a community group to put in an application for a bid to buy it, and what the purpose was we'd use it for, and other people could bid on it and put in their applications as well. We didn't actually get much feedback on it, and we didn't secure it. We were going to use it as a community garden and an orchard. And the private individual who did buy it has clearly done absolutely nothing with it. It's just a piece of rough ground. And we were advised at the time that you were actually looking for people to come up with not just a bid on it, how much they pay, but also a purpose for what they'd use it. So this individual clearly hasn't used it for what purpose they bought it for, and I just wonder if you actually do track that individuals do follow up. So my two questions are, is there a minimum level of asset that you would take formally through this process? And do you actually follow up on when somebody takes on some asset that they actually do use it for the purpose they bought it? Thank you.
There will be no minimum. I might be wrong, but was this not a piece of land that was owned by a charity?
We were told it was owned by the charity, but was actually administered by Kirklees as one of your assets now, because the charity had gone.
So let me just take that. That is a slightly different process. So there is there's a large amount of charities that over the years have become either defunct or whatever, and the council's taken them over or inherited them at some point. So there's a set of trustees. The cabinet acts as trustees for these. We have regular meetings to discuss some of these charities, and some we've got significant amounts of money in there. But when we go for a meeting, we throw our cabinet hat off at the door and come in and we act as trustees. So that was not a council asset. It was an asset of a charity that is administered by the council. So we have as a group of trustees, we have legal advice from our compliance officers. We have Martin Durnley, head of corporate governance and audit, who looks after us. So we have the council legal advice and governance advice, and we act in the interest of the charity, not the council. And therefore that land was deemed to be disposed of. So the charity disposed of it because it was serving no purpose. Under charity legislation, once we pass that on, it is up to the then owner of the land to develop or do as they wish with. But that's why it's not a council asset, it was a charitable asset.
Are there any more questions? Thank Thank you, officers, for your presentation and the Cabinet member. We've now come to the end of the meeting, and I would like to thank everyone for your attendance today, and just a reminder that the next meeting will actually be on the 17th of February. Thank you.